Hello and welcome to Pressing Issues for Sunday, October 25th. I'm Rich Grafton, and tonight we'll be looking back at Walt Disney World in the 1973 era, pirates, trains, and automobiles. And we're also going to talk about the situation in California at Disneyland. Joining me tonight are Ron Anna.
Hello.
And Ashley Jasmer.
Hey, everybody.
And later on in the show, Katie Dunn will be joining us from California. So want to throw it over to Ron to tell us about some of the happenings and conditions and unforeseen circumstances that happened in 1973 in the Walt Disney World.
So 1973 was moving forward with the Stage 1. Space Mountain and Tomorrowland were well under construction for that expansion. Pirates replaced the Western River Expedition at this point. But if you look at the annual reports, they were supposed to start work on the Big Thunder Railroad at this time. And so things began to change here. And then at the end of the year, things come to a screeching halt. We have a few small openings during the beginning of the year, a couple more refreshment stands, and the Plaza Pavilion, the current Tomorrowland Terrace, opens. And that was always, like, from what I read, it seems that was always supposed to be a seasonal kind of thing. It was to alleviate summer and peak crowds. Because one of the things they started to learn, and this was in some of the annual reports as well, is that they realized people ate more. That, they wouldn't just go back to across the street or something like that. So more restaurants had to come in and things like that. You've got the station break opening in the Main Street train station, and the Oasis open over by the Jungle Cruise. And then starting in April, you start to get some soft openings of some more attractions. Tom Sawyer Island, the second riverboat, the Richard F. Irvine, came on, and you got the Walt Disney Story on Main Street, the Plaza Swan boats. So we're seeing a lot of stuff that opened that's just not there anymore, and that's going to be kind of the story of this year. Is not only that stuff, Pirates obviously live forever so far, but also over at the Contemporary, you got the Fiesta Fun Center replacing the Sunshine State Exhibitorium, which I've seen a little bit of back and forth on my different sources that it did open quickly as a convention center, and then quickly they had enough convention space. They started putting in like some table games before they changed the name over in 73. So at that point, I don't know exactly when the games came in, but it was before the Fiesta Fun Center from what I can tell. When they changed to the Fiesta Fun Center in 73, there's a movie theater that was ticketed to go see some second-run Disney movies. That only lasted part of the 70s because that eventually will get replaced with a shooting gallery, but that's in the future. And the other thing that was a major addition this year that's no longer with us, and they even started taking out some of the last remnants of it this year with the construction going over in Fort Wilderness, was the Fort Wilderness Railway, which was just another loop of train to get you around the expansiveness of that resort. At this point, they had 713 or 14 campsites. They had room for up to 1,200. Things obviously changed. They put in cabins, things, and more recreational stuff like that. So that took up some of that space. But they never got to that 1,200. The 700 is fairly close to what we have now, which is around 8, from what I remember. So that's what happened in the park this year. And I find it interesting that so much of it is stuff that's gone. They also can't. This was the last season of the water ski show, so I mean that is going to come up to why it came. What we're going to talk about at the end of this is the gas crisis brought a lot of stuff to a halt. It was probably up until like 9/11 and this crisis, like those were the big things. Gas price quadrupled. With most airlines weren't a big thing. I mean, they existed. Commercial flight really didn't start taking off for most people until the 80s. So with 75% of your crowd coming from out of state, it really did affect Disney numbers. By the end of the year, some days year-on-year attendance was down 12, 15%, and over the holidays overall it was down 8.9%. So it was a big hit. And because of that, there were layoffs, projects were canceled. We never got stuff that was announced. That Asian resort artwork was out. They had the land cleared, and they just said, no, we don't need it anymore. So that's kind of what happened this year, except for one little event at the Contemporary at the AP Editors Conference, and one of the most famous speeches in American history is the Nixon "I'm not a crook" speech. Was part of a televised broadcast to the AP that he did to the AP editors. This was well into Watergate and about 9 months before his resignation. So that's the lowdown of what happened this year. And I want to talk about, Rich might remember some of these. Ashley is obviously not going to. She's
nope.
But you know of a lot of these things, I'm sure.
I do, yeah.
Like the swan boats, I didn't realize, like, for years, even when I worked there with that. I'm sorry, I'm just watching the chat talk about my hair. So that's distracting. That the swan boats went all the way around the treehouse, and I think about what those waterways looked like, in the late 90s, that there was so much foliage and overgrown stuff that it didn't, it just didn't seem like it fit. So let's talk about those things that open and that are gone. Like, the original Plaza Pavilion, the swan boats, the fact that there were 2 river boats on the rivers of America. And they also added the canopy over the teacups this year. So that's kind of all the big stuff that opened. But these restaurants, things, do you guys think it was an expansion too fast? Do you think it was just the gas crisis kind of hit? Or do you just think they just had to evolve with a lot of this stuff? And like the swan boats, there was an accident. If I remember correctly, that might have been the end of them. That's just a recollection. I'm not 100% on that. I haven't the research is coming along year by year. There's just too much to try and put everything in one spot. Stacks of books, that's all right now. But so let's just start I can't believe there was that much demand in Disney World for the 2 riverboats. I mean, they had the Columbia and the Mark Twain in Disneyland, but I mean, two of the same boat just seems like overkill, but it lasted for a long time.
I suppose so, but at the same token, it's a fairly long ride around the river, so maybe it just had more to do with crowd control than them actually completely filling the boats to capacity, just so that the queue, because it's not a very long queue either, so maybe it had more to do with that. To your point, I don't see the demand for it, but that's the only logical explanation I could think of why they would keep 2, especially for so long. Is that?
And I can't remember
if I remember right. In one of the histories, I can't remember. There was the idea that there always had to be something moving. A lot of kinetic energy was one of the hallmarks of what Walt Disney had done intentionally to design, and there was a whole period of time when there was nothing on the river when the single riverboat was going around back. So they planned to have 2 so that there was always one in sight, if I remember
Oh.
reading that correctly.
I suppose that makes sense too.
But
Interesting.
given, there was so much more action on the river because you still had the explorer canoes and you still had the two keelboats going around. The river was a really kinetic place. And with all of that, the traffic, like, you seem like you need a traffic controller, but especially now that you have the rafts going back to Tom Sawyer's Island, which, was more of a draw. You had a restaurant there that was there for years that I remember Aunt Polly's kind of fondly, but that might not be, accurate, because I remember the cold fried chicken. That's what I remember it being famous for. And
That just
that's it was picnic style fried chicken, so it was heated and then they let it cool because it was supposed to be a picnic meal. Apparently there was a Huck's Treehouse on the island, which I don't remember recently, but I'm a little too old to run through and play on things, so if I go over there, it's just a quick walk around the island just to say I've done it. I don't remember if that's there now, but it didn't look like it was on the maps I've seen.
I don't
so
think so.
even that changed. It was just so much, and and then the big thing obviously is Pirates, which they rushed to open for the holiday season. Apparently the rest of Caribbean Plaza wasn't there at the time. So it was basically like, because there was an arcade and the shops and El Parate El Perico. So all of that I don't think opens till the next March. So I think to counter the effect of the gas crisis, which I'll get to in a second, they opened Pirates for the holiday season in kind of an unceremonious way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's in. So for our younger audience and those who don't know, the gas crisis was a response to two things. Mainly it was a response to the October War, where the OPEC nations cut production and raised prices against countries that supported Israel during the war, which was most of Western Europe, Japan, the U.S. But also it was a time when, in the same period that was going on, the negotiations between the nations and the oil companies broke down about the same point. So that's just what that was. Gas prices shot up. They quadrupled. I don't know what gas prices were before because none of the histories I was reading quickly said that gas had shot up to 88 cents. And that's a price that, we had in the mid to late 90s still. So think about that from, 25 years before that. That's a big deal. So it really did put a hamper on things. The Asian resort was canceled. That was already being started. The idea of the Persian resort went completely out the window. And things started to affect, particularly Disney fared much better than their neighbors. I mean, the area around it had overbuilt hotels, but most of them, folded. Those little, the first gen of, the 192 and iDrive area hotels.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those folded because Disney's hotels went from 95% capacity to 80%, basically, because there was only 1,500 rooms on property. That's not that hard to fill. And the prices obviously were much lower, were high, but $25 as opposed, still it was expensive for the time, but it wasn't the equivalent of $600 a night for these hotels. So there was still a little more value to it. And they were resorts where there was so much more recreation than there is now. They had, the water sports, the boats you could rent. There were so many more of those things there to support it. The Contemporary, when they built Bay Lake, lost I think 8 tennis courts. So there was just a lot more over there at the time. So Disney was down 9% attendance for the holiday season. After the holiday season, they laid off 1,700 workers. 1,000 of which were part-time or seasonal that came on just for the holidays. So it was about 700 full-time workers. A lot of them do get called back a little later in the year. And at this point, they only had, maybe 8,000 like peak employees, if I remember. So that was a big chunk. And also at the time, the parks were responsible for up to 2/3 of revenue for the company. Not like, they're still a huge chunk now, but it was not, you didn't have billion-dollar movies. Like, this was one of their worst periods for movies. Where you're releasing like Herbie sequels and things like the Aristocats and stuff like that aren't weren't blockbusters. This is the Ron Miller producer era, which I think most people are going to say are really not the best era, especially for revenue. This is where we start seeing the company decline that leads to the green mail in the early 80s. So that's all coming from this. And the fact that they have to build Epcot in some way, or the state legislature is going to start dunking on them by the end of the season or the end of the decade for all these promises that are unkept. So here they are. They're just trying to weather this. And so that's the oil crisis. It hit hard. The stock value went from the equivalent. I don't know if I think it was 125 to 130. I don't know if that was adjusted dollars or whatever. It's very hard. When you look at stock history, they give you today's price, and there's been so many splits since then. It's probably, but it lost 2/3 of its value at one peak. So think about during the COVID crisis, the stock was about 140 to 150. At the lowest point, it was in the upper 80s. This would be the equivalent of it dropping down another, $30 in that period. And it recovered fairly quickly here. The recovery back then was coming up, but it wasn't, back up real quick. And we've had up and downs, particularly with the California stuff happening. But that's what you've seen. That's the big stuff. And I obviously didn't live through any of this. It's always history. And it wasn't even like stuff you took in history class because it was too recent. So
this
on
the topic of the gas crisis, sorry, just to interject some color. So I first went to Disney World in 1974, which was the year after the oil embargo and everything happened. But just to give you an idea, at that point in time, the family owned a single car, and it was a Chrysler Town & Country station wagon. I remember it had a huge V8 in it. It was in a massive air cooler, and it was just a massive engine. I don't know if it was a 5-liter or what, but the car was so big that you could stand in the engine compartment next to the engine to work on it, because my dad and I did that, and still have room to move around. So, the cars were huge on cheap gas. And then fast forward a few years, 3 years later, I got my first car, which was a Dodge Aspen, which was still a heavy iron, traditional Detroit steel car, but it had its own teeny tiny little V6 in it, an inline 6 that could hardly move. So not only did we have the gas crisis, but we also had a car crisis, because suddenly all of the little teeny cars that were being ridiculed in the early 70s, by the late 70s, were what everybody wanted, and nobody knew how to make them or sell them except, Datsun, or now Nissan and Toyota and so forth. So there was that, and people had to figure out how to rebudget their entire transportation stuff, gas and cars.
And it wasn't just the budget. We never got to full rationing, but it was certain days of week, certain people could buy license plates. There were lines of that. Sundays, gas stations were just closed in a lot of places. There weren't credit cards, so there wasn't like just unmanned pumps at the time, obviously. Like you had to always have an attendant at the point. They never did get to full national rationing. I think I have a picture in the article of some of the printed but never used rationing stamps that they were going to put out. So it wasn't just it cost you more to travel. Some people just couldn't travel. And as I said, it was at the time 25% Floridians, 75% out of state. It's probably still close to what it is now, but they responded. One of the things they did is they started marketing more towards Florida and marketing more. They opened Walt Disney Travel Company offices in, I believe, London and Tokyo to start marketing to those two markets to get more international coming, and that's where that begins. Because we knew it wasn't maybe OLC, but it was years and years of people from Japan had been approaching Walt, Roy, and their successors to get those parks. So yeah, they had to really rethink of everything they were doing. And I'm not really sure if this put the end to it, but at this time, you're still seeing Lake Buena Vista area, what would become the rental villas and stuff, as supposed to be a residential community. I think that continued for a few more years. I don't think this was the end of it, but I think it definitely put a hamper on those plans and the development of Epcot from being any kind of city to what we got. I mean, it was because the company took this massive hit here. Yeah, that's about it. I could really go for the gas crisis without even getting more ridiculous into history. I don't think we need to.
It was definitely a reorientation. I mean, up to that point, United States had been in crisis before, but because of the international impact of OPEC existing and then turning the screws, I think a lot of people, politicians, regular people, business people, realize that, oh, hey, the things are not quite as predictable and stable as we thought they were. And I think that more than anything else really caused Disney and a lot of other people. I mean, if you look at ABC, NBC, CBS, if you look at one of the big steel companies, it's now U.S. Steel, but I forget what it was then. They really,
I think it was U.S. Steel at the time, because
they really had to think what they were doing and how they were going to do it. And I think that more than anything else, instead of just kind of following the road that they felt that Walt had laid down, that road was gone. And so it's kind of like, I don't know if anybody's an Asimov Foundation fan out there, but it's kind of like when Harry Selton predicted the future and it was totally wrong because of the unknown event of the mule and so forth. That might be a little esoteric, sorry. But it's an unexpected event, a totally random event that nobody could have predicted, and it totally changed how Disney planned things from that point on, I think, is really what happened. Like you say, Epcot, totally different. Hotels, totally different. The thing that was going to be Lake Buena Vista, rental village, and everything else, totally different. I think that really impacted the psyche, for lack of a better word, of Disney for the plans going forward.
Right, they were planning. They had 153 villas that were rental apartments, not rental short-term vacation rentals. Because at the time, you could restrict voting to property owners and stuff like that. So they had these, but they would still control the ability to vote. And Lake Buena Vista was not where any of the Disney facility, the theme park facilities, were. So even if they did have a vote, it was not going to affect that. They canceled as 9,000 other housing units. Obviously, never come to the area, but we still see the Treehouse Villas open in a couple years, which are not the current ones we had. They're slightly different, but in the same kind of area. So that hit that. One thing I love that opened this year, and we were talking about, was that Fiesta Fun Center. I remember this so fondly from my childhood in the 80s. Obviously, when it opens in 73, you don't have video games. You have stuff like skee ball and carnival type games, or boardwalk, I'll say, type games. Pinball, skee ball, some form of knock hockey, pool, all those kind of things are in there. Not the video games don't really start till the late 70s, But when I was a kid, it was full of video games. And I saw a lot of sites make this point, and to jog my memory, is that it wasn't like the arcade everybody had at their mall. One, it was huge. I mean, think of the size of the Wave now, and that was entirely video games. And it was a lot brighter lit. It wasn't dark and dank like a bar. It was lit like, like a food court at a mall. Like, it was like that bright. And there was a snack. There was another, I think, a 24-hour. It was a 24-hour facility. I think it had a 24-hour snack bar. It had the movie theater running at that point. But like, what I remember is, and this is going to sound like, I think a lot of the younger people know, like, oh, driving games in arcade. They used to have booth games that weren't driving games. Like, the stand-up arcade booths, like, the original Star Wars one, which was these vector graphics. It was like outlines of TIE fighters, and you had this control that looked kind of like a steering wheel, where you would, stand up and, try and blast the TIE fighters on the Death Star trench. They had a sit-down version of the same game and the stand-up, so there were those kind of games. I remember that being a sit-down game, and this Star Trek game where you controlled a little 8-bit Enterprise with a roller ball way in the back of those things. Those are just really fond memories of my childhood at that Fiesta Fun Center. So I love that. I know arcades can't exist in the way they did, not just because people don't want to touch services, but like, you can't keep up with what's happening on consoles and VR. Like, those things can't be there. But I think that's a huge loss. I think that, as particularly at hotels, that was like teenagers, like preteens and teens that get sick of the pool or just get tired would come in and just dump $5-10 into video games, and that was a lot of money at the time, and you didn't think about it a quarter at a time. Do you guys have anything on like the arcades and stuff like that?
Well, there's a couple of comments in chat about it's, why would you go to Disney and play games? And yeah, okay, but Disney World, because it was only Magic Kingdom didn't have as much in it as it does today. It was not more than a day or two worth of park back then. I remember when our first couple trips, we stayed at a La Quinta Motor Inn off property, and I spent a fair amount of time. They had an arcade room. It had 2 games, and one was a helicopter landing game. And I spent probably way too much time and money playing that game in the lobby of our hotel.
So some stats, I'm remembering these off the top of my head, but these came from some things in the annual report. It was like, I think they said the average guest stayed 3 to 5 nights at the Disney hotel, but only like went 1.8 to 2.2 days in the park. So there's a lot of time you would spend at your resort. And there wasn't even downtown Disney. Like, the Village Marketplace doesn't even open until 74. So people were spending time at the beaches at the hotel, at the pool at the hotel. The parks were open late. Like, during the summer, they consistently were open till the park was open till 1 o'clock a lot. So you did have people would go in the morning, come back to the hotel to rest in the afternoon, because they're both on the monorail. Like, it's so easy to get there. And you would just go back. So that was there. And that's what my parents used to do. Like, we were fairly local. I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, so it was about a 3 to 4 hour drive. And that's another thing I forgot about. One of the biggest lasting impacts of the gas crisis was a 55-mile-per-hour speed limit, which didn't go away till the mid to late 90s. So you used to have the 70, 75, 65 were all over the country, but they put that 55 nationwide in, not for safety reasons, was because with those big blocky cars, that was the optimal. That was the optimal speed where you would start losing fuel efficiency to wind resistance beyond that. So that was part of the thing. So I would grow up, we would drive up, and we'd usually come up on a Friday afternoon or a Thursday, like, depending if we were taking Monday off or Friday off. We'd always just do a 3-day weekend, because for me it was just the 2 parks most of the time. and we'd stay at one of the hotels. We'd go in the morning. My parents would go back to the pool. I had a pool at home. I didn't feel like I didn't need to be in a pool on there. I didn't have an arcade, so I would go to that arcade and that shooting gallery, which I can't wait to talk about because it was a weird shooting gallery. It had like a graveyard and a bar and like a witch's area. It's a weird thing, and I can't wait to talk about that because it's some of the props have been moved around different places, but they were a huge thing and they were packed. I mean, I remember even Marriott hotel game rooms at the time were a huge thing everywhere. Like every hotel that wasn't strictly for business had to have a decent arcade back in the 80s and early 90s.
Sorry.
No, I'm just trying to think of other things
that
really.
I'll just make a couple more comments. It's interesting that we were there the year after 73 and 74, and some of my few of my favorite things are being built during this period. If I remember correctly, based on what I've read and what you said, Carousel of Progress, People Mover, two really solid additions to Future World, Tomorrowland, whoops, even though one could ask what Carousel of Progress had to do with tomorrow, but that's all right. They were still two of my favorite ones. And Tom Sawyer Island, still one of our favorite places, both when I was a kid, but also now that I'm a dad and have kids, to hang out. Just go through the, caves, and they're kind of cool lighting, and it's usually a quieter place, and you go across the wavy bridge, the rocky bridge to the other part of the island. So those things, were built during this time. We often focus on what didn't get built, and who knows what the hotels or what an Epcot municipality would have been like. But we get Pirates, another favorite. By the time we were there, the Caribbean Plaza was brand new, so that was like Pirates being reintroduced all over again. And we didn't get to Fort Wilderness, and I'm kind of bummed that we never ended up for years later going to Fort Wilderness. By the time we were in Fort Wilderness, because we did cabin and camping, the Fort Wilderness Railway was a treasure hunt type of attraction, where if you could go to certain places in the property, you could see the remaining berm of the old railroad, and that was the extent of the interaction with the Fort Wilderness Railroad.
Yeah, I never made it over there as a kid either. I think the first time I went, I was working at the company already and just decided, hey, I've never been here. Let's go over there. I never did Hoop-de-Doo until, what was it? When did we go as a group? Like 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, not this most recent Christmas, but the Christmas before?
Yeah, I think it was.
I think it was Christmas 2018. It was Rex the Halls.
Right, it was, so it was Rex the Halls. That was the first time I ever did that. I'd gone over and I'd eaten at Trail's End before that, which, that's one of those hidden gems. And it's still, no matter how many people talk about it, it's so hard to get to, it stays a hidden gem. But it's, I just never went over there because I'm not a camping person. I'll admit that. I've gone camping. And now most of when I go camping as an adult, I've honestly been too drunk to remember most of it.
That's the best part about it, though. That's why you
one thing I will not recommend is wandering around in the woods, chugging straight out a bottle of 100 proof schnapps. It's not a good idea.
No, don't do that.
Especially...
Let's write that one down.
Yeah, wandering around North Carolina woods with a bottle of 99 bananas was not a good night.
Ooh.
Really not a good night.
No. So you stay at the campfire and you play cards and you drink, right? You don't go wander.
Well, no, this was during the day. We had a group, but still, I should have left the bottle back at the camp. So I never got over there. I do want to stay at the cabins. They look amazing. They're not here yet, but I do need to check. I do need to spend more time at Fort Wilderness, and I always regret not doing that after seeing it as seeing all that's there. And this is the part where Fort Wilderness was becoming Fort Wilderness. Pioneer Hall, and is that called the settlement? Or I always remember there's like this.
Yeah, so the settlement is near the water and the outpost is check-in, so yeah.
Yeah, so the settlement was being built at this time. You had the Tri-Circle D in its original location up front, and all that. So things were being added at the time, and they were really making it a destination. And I mean, they had archery, they had all these things I remember coming up at the time. And like my parents were also like me; they were, their idea of roughing it was staying off property, admittedly. So we weren't going there. Yeah, and when I first heard about that, like it was before we had all this documentation on the internet. I heard that there used to be a train there, and I'm like, really? Like, did it go like? And the stories where it went all the way to the contemporary, like back in the like 90s, like there was a Disney online community, and it was the Rec Arts Disney Parks, and not the current Hidden Mickeys, but there was a website called hiddenmickeys.org that people reported hidden Mickeys and stuff like that, but they had like chat rooms and stuff like that. And there were all these stories, and a lot of it was apocryphal. And that's coming to kind of bite me in the ass now, because Disney was not good at documenting stuff back then. This is kind of pre-archives period. Like, I could not find I found a 72 map was the earliest I could do, and the brochure maps didn't come until I think late 72, 73. And I have a 73 spring map, which I will be posting. The Wigs will have access to some of these original documents that I've been able to find. I still need to get around to doing that, but that is coming. Any kind of primary source stuff I do want to post. And some of that will be, these annual reports. We have some eyes and ears and stuff to scan. So, if you're interested in that kind of stuff and you're not a member of Wigs, check out our Patreon. And, the levels, there's really basic levels to get access to this kind of stuff. That's really it I could think of for 73. Like 74, we're going to have some stuff. 75, obviously. We've got Tomorrowland, which is all being built at this point. It was actually, stuff was supposed to start opening summer of 74, but they slowed down construction because of the gas crisis. Where Space Mountain was originally supposed to be summer to late summer 74 opening. So it's about 6 months later that they actually get to it, and that's just kind of a reaction to, well, we don't need to draw people in that quick and expand as quickly as we did. And that's going to cap off this kind of phase one. There'll be little stuff into that late but most of the stuff we're going to talk about after that is going to be like the start of Epcot construction, because between 75 and 80, I don't think you see an attraction added to the Magic Kingdom, if that I can recall. It's
not
totally
that I can readily
static.
Think of.
Yeah,
I think it's just totally static for 5 years.
Everything was the same.
Well, I think, because they were more focused on Epcot and then fixing Epcot once it opened, because it didn't draw like they thought it would until they relented a little bit with characters and things like that. So, I don't think there's, beyond this, there's really a whole lot of change to Magic Kingdom until, I think the 80s.
Oh, how about resorts? Yeah, we forgot the golf shop open, golf resort opened this year, and that stays as the golf resort until the mid 80s. It's not a big resort, only 150 something rooms, and it really is designed for those golfing vacations. I mean, you could walk. You don't have like the monorail thing. You could walk over to the Polynesian and use their monorail. They had the buses, but it wasn't, designed to be a park hotel for that reason. Those are two, even at the time, championship, beautiful courses. They're running the Walt Disney World Invitational, the Walt Disney World Open. They call it different things. It changed this year. This is the last year of that. Then it becomes like for like several years, it becomes a team tournament thing, but that's all being run there. And then they have, golf on the other side of the property. So, I mean, I knew golf was a popular thing for years and years, obviously, because Bob Hope and Johnny Carson made jokes about it for that. But I didn't think it became like almost as democratized. I mean, it's still not democratized. It's still an expensive sport with expensive things, but I didn't think it became quite as mainstream till later. But obviously, if they've got a resort just for that, or it could have been like, all right, honey, you take the kids to the park, I'm going to go golfing. And I think that might have been part of the draw of it too. And they keep it that way for a while, and that expanded the facilities there. You got better golf shops and country club kind of atmosphere. So that was the more relaxing resort, and that's the last resort to open until the Grand Floridian. So like we're going to see a lot of static stuff, and I'm going to do my best to really get into the minutia of the little changes. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with this project in the first place. It's did Walt golf? I don't know. His particular sport was polo until he got injured. I don't know what he did after that, but he severely hurt his back in polo. And honestly, after that, I don't think he could have swung a golf club too well.
I don't think so.
So we are going to continue this, even though those years, they're going to be less for you to read, more for me to read, are probably how these are going to be. But we're still going to continue it, and we will do as much as possible to document those little changes. Shops are going to change. We start to, Main Street's going to evolve. We're not going to be these weird like Hallmark and sponsored clock and watch shops. Those aren't going to stay there forever. I mean, sponsors change, restaurants at the hotels change. The Luau Cove opened in '73. They just moved over. There's expansions at the Poly. They had a putting green at the Poly. They didn't have a second pool, but they had a putting green. I see food and menu changes. That's like there weren't bloggers. We don't have that level of detailed information. And what I can find, I'm going to bring you. But like it up until the mid 80s, when the like independent guidebooks really started becoming a thing, and then in the 90s when you started getting internet documentation, then again in 2000, like these are exponential expansions on the amount of information that we have available, and that's going to really change things. But I've been doing a lot of the research right now. I'm going to have some help in trying to find these minutia, but I've got Ashley, Reg, Jason. I've got a lot of people who are willing to help me, but right now there's been so much of it. I've been just trying to in one narrative form, but we are going to do everything we can to bring you anything more than like a cart changing. The menus, we're never going to be able to get to that. That's a little bit beyond the scope of what I wanted to do with this, obviously. If we like, when we get to the modern era stuff, when we, bloggers were doing that, though, if we every time a menu changed, these articles would be 15,000 words for every year. So we're not quite getting to that. Overpriced food, I don't think it was relatively. I mean, they had those, from what I could tell, even the expensive restaurant menus seem to have the wider range. Like, take Boathouse as the example. You could get a pair of filet mignon sliders and fries for $14, $15, or you could get a $60 steak. And that's what I seem to see in the few places that have that. I do have some menus. There's some great histories of contemporary, and obviously Steve's Tiki Man pages really highlight a lot of what went on at the Polynesian. Retro WDW are great, or some of the. So these are the sources I'm using, like other than official books and like annual reports and stuff. Widen Your World, they have a lot of those real detailed information. I'm just trying to collate all that into one space, and some of that's not going to make it through. Obviously, when there's less to do, we might get into that just as a discussion, but I don't think it was expensive, but I don't think we got to the point where it became luxury level expensive, like until the mid '90s. Like that's when like
I was going to say when it became outrageously expensive for what you got.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, my memories are not going to be that great because I wasn't paying for anything. You know, my dad was an attorney. My grandfather was in the restaurant business, so we had I grew up fairly okay, so we had the money for these things, but there were the expensive places, but they weren't all like there wasn't quite as much of it. Like you had places like the equivalent of Victorian Albert's. They did have that. They had the Gulf Coast room, but that wasn't. I don't think you had as many with what we call the signature restaurants, but the food also wasn't as varied. Like you had a Mexican restaurant, you had a pizza place. Like the only pizza place in the Magic Kingdom, I think, was what became Friar's Nook. Like you had really basic food, so it wasn't as overpriced. And Eisner was responsible for really changing a lot of the food, I'd say. And then
making it more diverse.
Once they did that and they had the more resorts, that's when you start to see that price really creep because they could start seeing what the market can bear in one place without affecting like everybody else can still try these and we could keep testing and pushing up here. And that just accelerates over the years. So it was bad, but I mean, it wasn't McDonald's prices, but it wasn't what we see now. So that's what I have for 1973. 74, we're really going to, I think talking about the original Village Marketplace is going to be a little bit of it. And that's going to be the main part, I think, for next year. There's a few, in-park changes. Starjets will open. But we're really beginning to, like, slow down on that Phase 1 stuff. So we're going to try and look in the minutia. And there's another cool historical event to talk about for next year that's not quite as depressing as the gas crisis. I mean, the Nixon thing's cool. There's not much to talk about. He just gave the speech. Tom and Jason stayed in the room where he was staying. Just a couple weeks ago, we have the review of that up on the site to check out the presidential suite. The decor almost looks like it would come out of the 70s, which most of the contemporary does. But I don't think he stayed there overnight. I think he had the room for the day at the conference. And I was surprised how much conference business they were doing. I mean, I think they said they had like the annual reports are saying like they have like 300 or 400 conferences booked into the future, like in every report I've seen. Wow. So that's it, and that's where we're going, and we're going to keep this up. I think right now the articles we were looking at Fridays. I think we've kind of settled on Saturday most of the time for this. So that's where that's going to be, and we're going to get to some of the weirder stuff I think coming up.
Alrighty. It's 10:09. I think Katie has joined us. So just to introduce I'm sure we all have heard of what's been going on with Disneyland and the California situation. Just to kind of recap a little bit, was it last week, Tuesday or Wednesday, the governor finally produced the guidelines for when large theme parks could open. And they have to be in what they call the minimal or yellow tier, which is less than 2% positive tests and less than 1 in 100K new cases. California, if I remember, as a whole is still in the red tier, which is, I believe they're running at a little bit above 5 or close to 6% positive tests and around 4.5 cases per 100K, but those numbers change all the time. But Orange County is in, I forget, it's the one that's not minimal but not red. Orange. Okay. So they're in the orange tier. The Orange County in the orange tier. Most people are saying that based on the current trending, it's going to be months then before any of the big theme parks, Disney, DCA, Universal, could open. And wanted to kind of hear from somebody who's actually out in California. So Katie, welcome. Welcome to Pressing Issues.
Hello, thank you. Happy to be at Pressing Issues tonight. Get some California action on the show.
Yeah, which is good for a change. So obviously we've seen what's been going on in the other theme parks that Disney owns around the world, and in general they seem to be, for lack of a better term, managing the coronavirus fairly well. Here in Florida, or there in Florida, I'm in Massachusetts, so I can't say here. Florida seems like they're doing all right. We've heard from our reporters that mask enforcement is pretty hot. They've been putting up and experimenting with different barriers on the rides and so forth. It seems like they kind of know what they're doing. They're trying different stuff and they know what they're doing. So what's the feeling? What's the buzz out in California with regard to Disney?
I mean, so this week we saw they put out new guidelines, which were obviously very restrictive. They included things like no indoor attractions. Obviously, we have to wait for that tier, which I think it was 1 to 100,000 new positive cases in Orange County, which is minimal to none. It's going to be really hard to see those numbers here, especially as the holidays roll around. People are always traveling back and forth from LA, and it's going to be hard to keep those numbers down to the standard that they want. So Disney called them, what were the guidelines? Keep the theme parks closed indefinitely plan. So it's just been a lot of news back and forth. We keep waiting for these guidelines. Every time we hope, maybe they're going to be less restrictive, but it seems as if they're getting more restrictive. So it's been tough out here on cast members, all the surrounding businesses. We did get some good news. Buena Vista Street will be opening for dining and shopping, which kind of some good news finally we've been waiting for. Disneyland will not be following. There will be nothing on Main Street as of right now. But other than that, it's the same stuff. They're keeping the safety protocols in place at Downtown Disney. People are listening, at least on property. Orange County is another story, but on resort property, they're doing a great job with safety practices on the resort, I would say.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, the reports that we're getting from, everyone. The Anaheim mayor, these guidelines fail the working families. The president of Disneyland, Ken Potrock, pointing out that they have proven that and I like he keeps using the word science-based health and safety protocols, which kind of sort of implies that their ideas from the government side are perhaps not science-based, nor are they safe. And the state of California continues to ignore this fact. I'm quoting from his statement now because I found it. Instead, mandating arbitrary guidelines that it knows are unworkable and that hold us to a standard vastly different from other reopened businesses and state-operated facilities. Together with our labor unions, and that's kind of a key dig as well, I think, we want to get people back to work, but these state guidelines will keep us shuttered for the foreseeable future, forcing thousands more people out of work, leading to the inevitable closure of small family-owned businesses and irreparably devastating the Anaheim, Southern California community. So what is the impact of Disney not being open to things that are going on in, the South LA, Anaheim area. I mean, it's not dead because there are other things to do. I mean, that people have to do, go to work and everything else, but has it changed?
It's definitely a different feel, especially at this time of year because, I mean, Halloween and Christmas, Anaheim this is the busiest time of year. So it's weird to see all the hotels empty and the restaurants are slow because, I mean, off property there's Garden Walk and that's still pretty popular. People will go dine there just like at downtown Disney, but just seeing Anaheim so quiet, the streets are dead, the hotels obviously are still empty. Some are like slowly opening. I actually talked to a couple at downtown Disney this week who drove down from Utah just to stay at a hotel and go to downtown Disney for a night. So they're getting a little business. Hopefully we'll see more business as they keep adding events. But it's just quiet. It's sad. The community's sad right now just with all the cast member layoffs. It's been a weird place to be in.
Excited that part of DCA is opening. It's been I was in DCA before they had Buena Vista Street, so I've never been there. But I mean, what's that going to be like, do you think?
I think it'll be interesting. They're opening up Carthay. I think Smoke Jumpers was another restaurant that was going to be open, which is kind of even peeking into Grizzly Peak a little bit, which is nice. So we get to see a little bit of the park. It'll just be so nice to be in California Adventure again. I think the shopping will be similar to what we have at downtown Disney right now, but dining it'll be so nice to be at Carthay and just walking down Buena Vista Street. And if it's opening in November, hopefully we'll get a little bit of Christmas. And it should be a good precursor to what hopefully will come. Because, I mean, down the street we have Knott's Berry Farm, who has been doing events for the past 3 months, and they're doing great. They had sold out every single weekend this month on top of adding extra days during the week. So hopefully it's successful and we can see growth in these events because people need them and want them. I guess they don't need them, but we need more capacity at Disney right now for sure. Just there's such a high demand for downtown Disney. So just flowing more people will be good. Hopefully get some more tourism in Anaheim.
Have you been to downtown Disney in this time? I mean, lately?
Yeah, so I go to downtown Disney almost every day. I report on the merchandise and all the fun stuff happening there at closed Disneyland. But it's been interesting to see from the beginning how it's changed and what they've changed in their policies and practices. And they're doing great. I have not had a day where I have felt unsafe.
Well, that's good. I know that.
Yeah.
The guy. Did you want to say something? Go ahead. I didn't want to monopolize the conversation. Sorry. Oh, sorry. I guess I thought I heard something. Anyway, the reporters who have been down in Disney Springs have said that it's been steadily getting more crowded, and although people are doing very well with the masks, it's getting harder and harder to keep the 6 feet. Even some of the queues with markings on the pavement, it's getting harder and harder to keep the 6 feet.
I do
How's that
agree
going
with that a
in
little bit.
California?
That's been one thing that I've seen we've been struggling with a little bit. The masks are not really a problem. I mean, all the Christmas merchandise just came out, and I went for that the other day, and people were just like, had no regards for personal space. And I'll wait, like I'll just stand back. But some people are just invading other people's space, which they cannot be doing in these stores, especially since they're raising capacity. It used to be like 150 people were allowed in World of Disney at once, and now it's like 225. So as we see more people allowed in, that's bound to happen. But definitely something that should be watched a little bit closer, I think.
So, I mean, do you think they're managing it as best they can then, based on the crowds, the number of people and so forth?
I think it's hard because they don't have a cast member standing there saying, you guys need to stay this far apart. I think even if there was a cast member standing there, it's not going to stop guests from grabbing what merchandise they want over people. And they can't escort someone out because they're grabbing merchandise at this point. So it's hard to kind of regulate that. They can try as well as they can, but there's not much.
Yeah. I wanted to read the memo from Ken to the cast members because I think it has, again, some interesting word choices. Once again, I find myself sharing news that I'd hoped would be very different. Today, despite our best efforts to advocate for a different outcome, the governor's office announced that large California theme parks have been placed in the state's most restrictive category for reopening. Clearly, this news is challenging for us and comes during what has already been an incredibly difficult month. To say I am disappointed and saddened is an understatement, particularly since all of our other theme parks in both the United States and around the world have been allowed to open on the strength of our proven ability to operate with responsible health and safety protocols in place for our cast and our guests. I know this news will prompt questions about what this means for our cast, our community, and the overall resort. I can't answer those questions today, as we are doing our best to understand the implications of this decision. I know there are tens of thousands of people, including each one of you, whose livelihoods rely on the theme park industry in Southern California. We will not stop working until we reopen Disneyland Resort so that we can bring our cast back to work, get the local economy moving, and share the magic and joy of Disney once again. And then, of course, just a few days ago, we got a note from I can't remember, one of the union heads, I believe, that they have received notification that layoff notices that will be effective December 31st are imminent. And then we get a statement from both the California Attractions Association and Disney to the, I think all options are on the table at this point. So Ashley and Ron, if Ron is still on, this is more, we try not to be political because we like Disney for the sake of Disney, and yet Disney, kind of like Ron was saying in the 73 period, the outside world definitely intrudes. What do you think?
I personally just, think that it's interesting that, because to your point, Disney always, at least from the outside, tries to say sort of atypical, that family-friendly image. And for them to be throughout really this, since over the summer when they first had to pull back the reins on reopening after they initially announced Disneyland's reopening, it's just interesting how, I don't want to say bold, but blunt they're being with all of their comments about the politics in California. They don't really, being polite seems to be steadily going out the window, which I just find interesting on the face of it, regardless of where you fall on that opinion. But the other thing too that I've found interesting, especially in the past several weeks, and Katie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if it's changed in the past couple of years, but at least when I lived out there several years ago, the city of Anaheim and Disneyland did not really coexist very well. And we're constantly fussing with one another. And it's interesting that they have sort of come together, and the enemy of my enemy has now become my friend, and they are both openly now working together to fight with Newsom. And so it seems like this really weird, really bizarre stance, or again, just the bluntness and the boldness of how they're going about it. They're not trying to be behind closed doors. They're not pulling punches on the statements that they're making. They're making it very well known and very boldly that they are very displeased with the state politics in California. And I just wonder what kind of impact going down the road with their continued operations that we're going to see with that. And so that I find kind of interesting to see how all of this plays out and how well they may or may not get along with the city going forward.
Yeah, I mean, Anaheim and Disneyland have always been at each other. It's a love-hate relationship because they get most of their revenue from the tourism from Disneyland, the convention centers, these hotels. So Anaheim, like, this year's kind of a turning point because Anaheim's like, we need to mend this relationship with Disneyland. We need to be with Disneyland to actually get the state to let us reopen. So it's been nice to see, Disneyland and Anaheim finally on the same page, just wrong situation. And it's so frustrating to just sit here and watch them go back and forth because obviously nothing's getting done. no jobs are being saved. It's the same thing back and forth. So I think they just need an ideal answer soon, so they know what to tell these cast members with the deadline that Rich was saying, December 31st, I think. But it's so sad. I really hope. It's weird seeing Disneyland take a play like that, because we didn't even see that with Walt Disney World. So it's weird to see Disneyland fighting with it. But it's also reassuring, like, okay, they want to get their cast back to work too. They want people back in the parks. Like, they want to do it safely. I think it was yesterday, 2 days ago, they had the new head of the chambers for North County Amusement and Entertainment speak in front of Disneyland, just regarding her visit and what she's seen at Downtown Disney. Once again, stating Disneyland is safe, they're doing a great job, reopen. And it's almost pointless. They've done so many ads. Anaheim has done ads. Disneyland has done ads. Health has come, health safety checks, whatever they need. It's all been done and nothing's happening. So it's terrible. I really hope we see some progress soon, and hopefully there's no I know they said they were taking it federally with the case, but I hope it doesn't come to that.
Yeah.
So because Anaheim is technically, I guess, in the yellow or whatever color tier it's in, and whereas all of California as a whole is slightly darker. I mean, what else is open? And I mean, I assume similar to the rest of the country, quote unquote, essentials were open. So you go to the grocery store, you go to the hardware store to get a new pipe that burst and that sort of thing. But I mean, what else and what else is open at this tier that the Disney parks are not allowed to be open in, I guess? Is there a comparison to be made there?
I mean, right now in Orange County, you can dine in a restaurant, you can go get your haircut, you can do almost anything. So it's weird you can go dine at a restaurant, but then behind the gates you can't. And I understand the attraction thing, and he's saying only outdoor attractions, but sure, then let them open now. That's the sad thing, because you can go sit at a brewery, take your mask off, be 6 feet from people, but they don't want you to just walk on Main Street.
Yeah, that seems wildly inconsistent application of a criteria, which bothers my OCD something horribly. So what I mean, it is interesting, as Ashley said, that we have some strange bedfellows. Disney, their unions, and their government, their local government, all kind of on the same side. Essentially waging a war against the state. Is a general feeling, I'm going to make an assumption, the general feeling is that the state is incorrect in their analysis and this is not the right way to do it. But is there anything else? Any other talk about it? Does everybody think that way? Or is that just from the East Coast looking at the West Coast, we think you should think that way?
I mean, it's a mixed emotion out here, because I've talked to cast members who have been laid off saying, good riddance, keep it closed. If they aren't going to bring anyone back to work, just keep it closed till it's 100% safe. And I understand that. It's a valid viewpoint, especially if you were just laid off by them. But there's also, there's still cast on the line. There's still all of this going on, and Anaheim really needs it really bad. And it's not even Anaheim. It's going to start all over Orange County. We have Knott's Berry Farm. LA County has Universal, even though it's not as dependent. Still get people back to work.
Yeah, and that's the issue. Any idea how many people are, percentage-wise or qualitatively, how many people are affected by all the parks being closed? Not just Disney necessarily, but, Universal, Knott's Berry Farm, all those places. There's got to be a fair amount.
I'm not sure an exact percentage, but I know, even cast that's working right now, that have been working at Downtown Disney since it opened, are worried that they're going to get laid off, and they have a job right now. So these people who have jobs aren't even secured. Knott's Berry Farm, they've been bringing in a lot of staff, actually. They've been hiring people, which is good. But I know Universal just laid off a lot of people. I'm not sure how many, but I don't think it's as nearly as close as, or as much as Disney's was, but Disneyland obviously is carrying a lot of the layoffs.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they're doing the prep work necessary to have a fairly large layoff, considering that they've informed the unions and the state. So how far away are you from downtown Disney? Is that a car ride or?
Yeah, so I'm only 10 minutes down the street. I'm in Fullerton, which is right next to Anaheim, so I can get there within 10 minutes.
So what's traffic and parking in that whole situation like? I know that sometimes at Disney Springs, the parking garages close even though you can still arrive by bus and get into Springs and stuff.
So the parking has actually gotten better. The only lot that is open is the Simba lot, which is like directly next to downtown Disney behind Disneyland Hotel. And they staggered parking in there. It hits capacity on weekends, usually by 10 a.m., which is terrible because it opens at 10 a.m., so people will start lining up at 9 a.m. So parking's been a problem. I know there was a day I had to park at Garden Walk across the street just to walk over, just to check in. But during the week, it's pretty quiet. The waits for temperature checks have gone down. I think there's more stuff opening here, so people have more to do other than just go to downtown Disney, which is good. But temperature checks before, I think I waited close to 2 hours one day just to get in. But lately it's been like 15, 20 minutes. I think only because they're allowed to let more people in now, which is good. World of Disney, and we now have the backlot studio premiere shop or whatever in Stage 17 in California Adventure, which is open. So now World of Disney and that balance more capacity for shopping inside downtown Disney. So less lines inside, parking's become better. It's getting better. So I think that's why they feel more confident opening Buena Vista Street now. So I would say try to stick to weekdays if you plan on going. Weekends get a little hectic, but if you want to tough it out, it's not too bad.
Yeah. I want to recognize Michelle in the chat, super chat, $10. Thank you very much. She says Knott's has been open for dining and shopping for a while. Disney could have been doing that this whole time, but instead they wanted to play chicken with the state. Yeah, there's probably a little bit of that. Thanks for the super chat. I didn't realize Knott's had been open. When did they open? Do you for dining and shopping?
But the park side isn't open.
Oh, okay. So the park is open. The entire park is open now. Their first event was in August, and it was Taste of Knott's. And it ran through August, and then they did it in September too because it went so well. And that was just, you would go in, you would pay $35, or I think this event was only $30, and you get a tab with like 5 food items and drinks, and you could go around the park and you could shop, and you can get from your tasting card, pick whatever food you want. And it was really fun because you were in the park. They had all the lights on, entertainment was out. It was really an awesome event. And then they totally stepped it up for the October event, which is Taste of Halloween, and sold out nearly every single event. I went for the opening night of it, and it was awesome. It felt like I was actually back in a theme park, and there weren't even attractions open. So they've been doing an excellent job. The food has been great. The entertainment has been awesome. They had magic shows and performers out and characters from a distance, but it's been great. I was really surprised to see Disney didn't announce something like this sooner, and hopefully they follow suit with Knott's and add more events, and hopefully we're able to go a little bit farther into the park eventually. But yeah, I definitely hope they take a note from Knott's on this.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So how is Knott's able to open basically the entire park? Yes, no attractions or whatever, and serve food and, like you say, a little bit of entertainment. Why can't Disney do that? Or right. Is it that they just didn't want to?
I think I was talking to some people at Disney about it, and there was this whole thing like, does it disvalue a Disney ticket? How are they going to charge people for the Disney experience, but then no attractions? We're not. It's a little bit under the level of Disneyland, where they can charge $30 and let anyone walk in the park, where Disneyland wasn't sure how to do that. But I still think there's a reasonable way they can, and they aren't even charging for the event that's going on with Buena Vista Street opening. So it's weird to see, they could have done that months ago and had more people in, and could be getting more tourism at Anaheim, having more people working. But I don't know. It's good. At least they're doing it now.
Yeah, at least they're coming around. So supposedly there's a big sign in the studio in Orlando and for WWNT Studio, and it says, because money. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some financial, like you say, how do they do maybe they could have called it a special party and charged only, $80 or something. They do special things
Right.
all the time, or did special things all the time. Lack of imagination, surprisingly, which would be totally ironic in Disney's case. But yeah, seems like hopefully they're on the right track now. We hope so, anyway. So the other question, or another question I had, when we go to Disney Springs, our reporters took us through some of the stuff, and I don't remember if you guys did that in California. Are you doing, temperature checks and queue lines on the sidewalk and limited entry into all the venues in downtown Disney and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so downtown Disney originally opened and there wasn't even indoor dining because the state hadn't passed dining yet. So when it first opened, it was just some outdoor seating at a few of the restaurants because only a few were open, and then a few of the stores were open. Now everything's open, indoor dining. You do have to get your temperature checked to enter. So what you do is to the Symbolot Park, get your temperature checked, go through security, and you're in downtown Disney, and then it's deciding what virtual queue you want to join to enter a store. Lately there hasn't even been reviews. Mostly everything's been like walk right in, which is super beginning a nightmare, but things are getting better. All the restaurants are open. We recently saw the Void shut down. The only restaurant I think hasn't opened is Split. I don't know if we'll see it reopen because it's a bowling alley, but everything else is open, ready. It's like a regular mall. It's basically a tiny version of Disney Springs.
Yeah. I know people often complain about Disney Springs in that you see the same stores at a regular mall, and now they're kind of treating it like the malls are treating the malls. And yeah, the Void is on those list of things that I would have liked to have done, but sadly will now probably never get to do unless I actually go to a Void off property somewhere and do Ghostbusters or something like that.
Yeah.
Anything else, Ashley or Katie, that we want to say before we begin to wrap things up?
I don't think so. Did we want to comment at all about Disney taking over the Marrakesh Pavilion or Morocco Pavilion?
Oh,
because that
we
was
could. Does that
too.
happen? That's a thing that has happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that the
A
only
surprising
pavilion
thing.
now that was not under Disney's sponsorship? So now all of the pavilions are actually run by Disney? Is that a true statement?
I thought Japan and/or China were still independent. Do I have that wrong?
I could be.
Or like
I'm just trying to go on record.
quasi-independent? Like half and half? I just want the over-under on when they announce Aladdin. Like that's what I want.
I don't know. Maybe not.
I mean,
yeah.
I will be shocked to pieces if it doesn't happen. Because let's face it, especially now that they announced that they're doing a sequel to the live-action Aladdin movie, come on, it's going to happen. There's no way that,
I don't know.
that JPEG is not going to stick as much Aladdin in there as possible.
Wouldn't it be nice if we got Sinbad's storybook or voyage? That would be
I
perfect.
would love that. I would love to finally be able
Right?
to see it in person. That's what I think Disney fans would honestly want more.
But
I just have a gut
probably
feeling they're going to lean into Aladdin. Yeah. Which is going to be a shame because
I'd rather have
that
Sinbad's
movie is
storybook.
not as good as Shandu. Yep. So
We'll have Aladdin and Jasmine's runaway magic carpet, in one of the back buildings, like where
God.
Restaurant Marrakesh is going to used to be or something like that. They'll have a lovely scene-based ride.
like in all
I think
seriousness though, I am just really curious what it's actually going to look like now with Disney taking over. Are they going to try to keep it the same? Are they going to go in and change everything? That's what I'm curious about.
Who knows?
Have they even figured that out?
Right. My hunch is that they're going to probably not touch it for the moment because, let it run while they figure out, like you say, exactly what it is they want to do. I mean, they already do have the Jasmine meet and greet. You know, and they're not doing meet and greet, so are they going to do something around that? A lot of the stores, I mean, I love poking through the stores, but I admit we've only ever bought one thing. But the stores are fascinating to poke through because they have things that you just don't see anywhere else. I wouldn't be surprised if that followed the trend of homogenizing with the rest of Epcot. And we've seen, you know, some of the individual things leave the UK and leave China and so forth. There's still, you know, a lot of good stuff, but it just seems like they would follow that same plan eventually. Yeah, we'll see. Who knows? I would say that given everything else that's going on and not going on, not going to see too much change in the near future. I think their plate is full. All right. Well, so everyone, that is Pressing Issues for Sunday, October 25th. Want to thank you for joining us. I'm Rich Grafton on behalf of our producer, Kevin Lake, tonight's panel, and the entire WWNT network. Thanks for joining us, and have a good night.